Hello and welcome to our webinar, Maximizing Your Membership, where we focus on exporting to the US or Mexico and making sure your goods are CUSMA compliant. My name is Corinne Pullman. I am going to wait another few seconds or so as people still come into the webinar and have you join us. Again, my name is Corinne Pullman. I'm the Executive Vice President for Advocacy at CFIB, and I'm really super happy to have you join us here today for this very important webinar on, I think, a topic that we have gotten lots of questions about. I am based in Ottawa, but I'd love to hear where you're based. So if you can throw in the chat where you're coming from today, that would be great. Hi there, David. Nice to have you there. Karen from Ancaster, glad you could join us. We have folks there from St. John's, Newfoundland, from BC, from Ontario again, Nova Scotia, Tillsonburg, Bridgewater. This is one of my favorite things about doing webinars, just seeing where everybody is from. Saw Montreal in there, Truro, Windsor, Belleville, London. So a lot of folks from right across the country that are able to join us today. So joining me today, actually, before I get to that, I wanted to make sure that you understood some of the logistics. There is a copy of the presentation in the chat. It'll now be before all the other people put their names in. So if you want to grab a copy of the presentation, it'll be there, but we will update the link throughout the presentation as we go in case you don't get a chance to grab it from there. Secondly, if you have a question, we encourage questions and we love for you to do that, but we encourage you to use the Q&A option, which is at the bottom of your screen versus the chat. You're welcome to use the chat to share thoughts and ideas. That we would also caution you, though, to do that based on the topic of today's presentation and where you can abstain from any political commentary. We've had a few of our members complain about sometimes the chat gets a little out of hand, so we would just appreciate everyone be respectful on the chat. Finally, as I said, the Q&A is where we answer the questions, so if you have any, please focus on there. It's easier for us to then ask our presenter and my colleagues those questions. Okay, now on to what we're doing today. So in addition to myself, I have with me my trusty colleague, Michelle Auger, our senior policy analyst. Say hi, Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here.
Michelle, of course, focuses a lot on trade and on competition, among many other files that she takes on. But we're really excited to have with us Shelley Garris. Shelley, if you could say hello.
Hi, everyone. So excited to be here today.
So Shelley is joining us. She's had a nearly 40-year career in transportation and logistics, much of that focused on customs brokerage. And for the last 10 years, she's focused her education advocacy for the members of the Canadian Society of Customs Brokers who have lent us Shelley today to give us some insights on this very important topic. She has attained the qualified person status, which is issued by the Canada Customs and Revenue Agency, as well as the certified customs specialist and certified trade compliance specialist. And she has earned her MBA from Athabasca University. So she's very knowledgeable. She likes to consider herself a trade geek and really enjoys the art of classification and trade agreements. So Shelley is the right person to bring to us to what can be sometimes a very complicated topic today. If I go to the next slide, what we are going to walk you through today is we thought we'd use the opportunity to update you a little bit on what we're doing at CFIB. So we'll just take the first 5 to 10 minutes for that, a little bit about what's going on with the federal election and what happens next, a bit, of course, of an update on the tariff situation, then we'll jump into most of this on the CUSMA compliance component that Shelley will lead, and then we'll get to questions and answers. So on to the next slide, I wanted to just give a quick update. We finally got through our federal election a couple of weeks back now. While there are some recounts pending, as of today, the Liberals have 170 seats, which is just short of a majority, which would be at 172. But there are 2 recounts going on as we speak, so we don't know if that will go up or down yet again. Of course, the Conservatives came in with 143 seats. Interestingly enough, the leader, Pierre Poilievre, lost his seat, but he is going to be running in a seat in Alberta shortly, as soon as they can get a by-election called. But in the meantime, Andrew Scheer has been nominated as the interim official opposition leader, as he has a seat in the House. The other interesting piece of this is, of course, the NDP lost quite a few seats, as well as their leader, Jagmeet Singh, and we now have a gentleman named Don Davies as their interim leader as they sort of regroup their own party and where they're going to go next. Of course, the new prime minister did have a meeting with President Trump last week. Nothing changed, but some say it went relatively well, and nothing got worse, nothing got better. So we'll have to sort of wait and see in the long run how that goes. There was a new cabinet announced just a couple days ago. So we have who the major players are going to be in this new government in cabinet. And they are set to resume in Parliament on May 26th, which will be the first time since basically last December. And that is only going to run till June 20th. So it's only about a 4-week period of time, but they are going to have King Charles in Canada to deliver the throne speech on May 27th. And just yesterday, they announced there would actually be no budget in 2025, or at least in the spring session of 2025, which is very unusual. Most budgets happen in the spring. They're a very common part of how governments sort of share what their plans are and how they're spending our money. The fact that they've made this decision not to do one, I think, has raised a lot of eyebrows, including ourselves. And so it will make pushing things just a little bit harder, but it doesn't mean it's going to stop us. So on the next slide, I wanted to give you a bit of a taste on what some of the key Liberal Party platforms were that we're going to hold them to. So there were many more than this, but these are the ones we identified as potentially being helpful to many small businesses out there. Things like addressing the trade disputes with the United States, removing federal barriers to internal trade, putting in place that middle class tax cut, which even just yesterday they confirmed will be their very first bill that they will put out there. But things like cutting HST on new homes, bringing day-to-day government spending down and reducing the government's operating budget, looking at things like red tape, which is an important one as well as some of the other elements that are on that screen are things that we're going to sort of hold them to a much greater degree. But in addition to that, there are a series of initiatives that we believe are unfinished business. So if you move to the next slide, there are some key things that we believe are still have to be addressed. And this has been our major push with these folks in the new government. Of course, first and foremost, the tariffs. They are collecting quite a bit of money from Canadian businesses right now, and that money needs to be returned to those businesses that are directly affected and even indirectly affected if it's having a tough, they're having a tough situation at this moment. There is no plan at this point other than for the auto sector. As you recall, the carbon tax was set to zero. So if you're in a province that had the federal carbon tax, which is all provinces with the exception of British Columbia and Quebec, they did eliminate the carbon tax, or at least set it to zero, but we'd like to see them eliminate it to this point. But they are sitting on $600 million that they collected in 24-25 that needs to be returned to small businesses as soon as possible. We also want to make sure that any monies that are returned in rebates from the carbon tax need to be tax-free, so you don't have to pay corporate income tax on that amount. So when you file your taxes for this year, that is an important one that they promised to do, but was never actually taken care of before all the changes took place in this government. But we would extend that to things like WCB rebates, which have just happened in Ontario and in Manitoba. Capital gains, they promised not to increase it after saying they would last year. They have now promised not to do that. So to make sure that that is confirmed, and to increase things like the lifetime capital gains exemption, which they had also promised to do prior to the changes that took place. We want to hold them to that. And then a couple of other issues around the small business tax rate as sort of a temporary, if not more permanent measure to help businesses through a really tough time. And of course, this focus on eliminating internal trade barriers is a big one, which there has been some progress made. We do have a new petition that we encourage you to take a look at if you have a moment and sign if you agree with any or all of these recommendations as we build up some momentum to sort of push the new Prime Minister and Cabinet to move forward on some of these important initiatives as quickly as possible. Okay, so that's it for that component. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Michelle to give you a quick update on the tariff situation.
And yeah, super quick on my part so we can jump into the meat of this presentation. But when it comes to the current tariff situation, everything remains status quo despite that meeting with Carney and Trump last week. So essentially, if you're exporting Canadian goods to the US, there are tariff on all non-compliant, non-CUSMA compliant goods coming from Canada. If they are CUSMA compliant, then you can benefit from that 0%. And then there are other tariffs that are still in place. So the 25% tariff on steel and aluminum, that's for all countries, and 25% tariff on non-US car builds. And then 10% on the non-CUSMA compliant energy and potash products coming from Canada. On Canada's side, again, nothing has changed since before the election. Everything is still the same. So we've got 25% goods on US products, so 60 billion worth of US products. That still remains in place. We also have the 25% tariff on US vehicles that are not CUSMA compliant. And just highlighting here that there still is that remission process available for business owners. So if you're really impacted by this, there is a process to have to ask the government to take your product off that 60 billion list of US goods. I do know that they've received quite a few applications for remission, so there's a bit of a backlog, but that is the process currently that exists to try to get those goods removed. And I'm just highlighting down here that we still have a form available on our website where you can share your direct concerns with the tariffs, and they get sent directly to our team. We have someone looking over these forms every day. So if there's anything you'd like to let us know about the impacts of the tariffs or anything in general about the tariffs and how the government's handling, this is the best way to get a hold of our team at the federal level. So please share your comments, questions with CFIB, and we'll be sure to take a look at them. It's also been a great way for us to kind of understand the current impact in Canada. And we've been sharing a lot of those comments directly with finance. So it's been a great way for us to understand, okay, here's what's happening on the ground with small businesses. And we've been, ad hoc sending those comments over to the finance department. On the next slide, just quickly here, this is not totally related to exporters, but I do think it's important that for those of you who are involved in importing, we talk about CARM. So CARM is the portal that everyone needs to be using if you're importing commercial goods. At this point, most of you are likely registered onto CARM. One of the key programs in CARM is called the Release Prior to Payment program. And that's essentially to allow you to obtain a financial security so that you can have your goods released without actually being physically in person at the border to pay your duties and taxes. So this program is... So there's two ways to kind of get that financial security. As of today, you put a deposit. It's a portion of how much you import that gets placed on the portal, or you can go secure a bond with a financial security provider. CBSE has a full list of who those financial security providers in Canada are that can help you with those bonds if that's the way you decide to get it. New as of yesterday on this one, if you don't want to put cash directly on the portal, CBSE has now come out saying that they are going to allow a credit card to be put on to kind of cover that deposit function. So that's something that CFIB has been advocating for, is that there needs to be a use of credit card. It's not exactly what we had in mind, but it's certainly a step in the right direction where they're putting more options in there for small business owners. The deposit function does allow you to take it in and take it out. So if you do put money or you put your credit card amount on there, you can move the money in and out. So it doesn't have to sit there on the portal. Just a reminder though, that the deadline on this one, if you are importing to be able to benefit from getting your goods released without going to the border, the deadline is May 20th. We are also asking them to extend this deadline right now. We're working with few industry folks. However, all signals are pointing right now that CBSA is not going to be moving on that deadline. And so that if you are currently not registered to the RPP program, I would highly recommend that we look into this as soon as possible. But we are, again, a couple of us from industry have been asking CBSA to create more space and more time for businesses to adapt to this program. A couple of resources from our end. If you're still unsure what RPP is, we do have a CFIB website about CARM, and we do have a webinar there that's really focused on navigating the CARM portal, and there's a whole section within that webinar focused on RPP. Okay, quickly on to the next slide. So the real purpose of why we're here today is to talk about what it means to be CUSMA compliant. So that's the Canada, US, Mexico agreement. It's the trade agreement between those three countries. It's been in place since July 1st of 2020. It replaced NAFTA. And it really lays out sort of the key rules for trading goods between those three countries. A big reason that this has now become so important is that CUSMA also lays out what it means to be CUSMA compliant. And to be CUSMA compliant, it all depends on what portion of your goods are originating from Canada or made or produced in Canada. And so, while doing some surveying and, thank you everyone who's answering all these surveys. It's been incredibly helpful with all of our work on tariffs. But what we learned from you guys in the surveys is that while a lot of you are CUSMA compliant, there's still a significant portion that aren't sure if they need to be, or that they haven't completed the paperwork. And so we thought that we needed to make sure we got this information in front of you to understand what it meant to be CUSMA compliant. And that's really the reason we are here today. So that being said, I think we can pass it over to Shelley, our expert, and she'll walk us through the steps of becoming CUSMA compliant.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully I'll be able to answer all of your questions on one of my favorite topics, rules of origin and compliance. Can we go to the next slide, please? So originating means that the goods have enough input and value from the members of the free trade agreement to meet those specific free trade agreement rules. Canada has approximately 24 free trade agreements, and they all contain similar elements. So rules on transportation and the costs that can be excluded or included, the rules on how the goods will qualify for the preferential duty rates and what documentation is used to certify that the goods will originate, and a means of certifying the goods as originating. Some agreements ask for a certificate, others ask for statements. In order to read and apply the rules of origin, a strong knowledge of the tools used in international trade is needed. You need to understand the harmonized system, the general interpretive rules, and valuation. It is critical in ensuring the proper classification and the proper application of the rules. The cornerstone of applying the rule of origin is the correct HS, and the use of a Canadian customs broker is strongly recommended. A Canadian customs broker can assist in the classification, the application of the rules of origin, and ensuring that your certification process is compliant. Originating is not the same as the rules on domestic labeling. The process is unique to the trade agreement. So let's take a look at the rules. The rules of origin fall into two broad categories. We have wholly produced and substantial transformation. So wholly produced, you want to think about natural goods, those that have no foreign and non-Canadian inputs. So you're thinking about things like fish, corn, wheat, agricultural goods, tomatoes, those kind of things. This is the easiest rule. You're 100% Canadian and you qualify. Can we go to the next slide, please? Substantial transformation. This allows that goods can be considered as originating when they've undergone a transformation. There are three methods of transformation that are permitted: a tariff shift, an ad valorem calculation, and certain specified processing and operations. The category of substantial transformation is also referred to as product-specific rules, or PSRs. And I'll try not to talk in acronyms, but if I do, somebody call me out on it, please. So I want to look at these methods. The tariff shift rule requires that non-originating inputs imported from outside of the free trade area must undergo a specified tariff shift. The inputs must be transformed into a new item. So think of a strawberry, and it can be made into jam. you've shifted, and by that you've gone to a new HS classification by the addition of sugar, pectin, and heat. So ad valorem, that means according to value. And a good is considered substantially transformed when the manufacturing operations carried out in the preferred trade area increases the value of a product to specified levels expressed by an ad valorem percentage. Normally, it can be expressed as a minimum or a maximum, but normally it is a minimum amount. And in CUSMA, it is a minimum amount to qualify. The special manufacturing processes are typically expressed by using general lists, and they're very, very specific to the product. An example of that, steel must be hot rolled to originate. Cold rolled steel would not qualify. And there may be certain domestic inputs to be used in finishing the good. Each product will have the rules listed in the trade agreement, and it will be wholly produced first, and then it will be the product-specific rules that can be considered. So let's take a look at an example. Next slide, please. So this is a tariff shift rule from CUSMA. We're looking at the heading for crabs and lobsters. I reside in New Brunswick, so I had to pick something close to my dinner plate. The rules state that you may smoke the goods and they will not lose their origin. The second portion is another tariff shift rule, and it says that you can add a good from any other chapter within the HS. And I picked this one because it's an excellent example of why you need to know your correct classification number. There are legal notes in this chapter that state goods of this specific heading cannot have binders or flowers added to them. So you'd almost be making like a crab cake. With that note, it means the classification number changes and you're no longer reading the correct rule for your product. So this rule also would say that you can pickle them, you could brine them, you could salt them, anything like that, and you would still qualify. So let's take a look at an ad valorem rule on the next slide. So this is an example of the regional value content. This is taken from CUSMA. The calculation is on the left-hand side. RVC stands for regional value content. It is always expressed as a percentage. TV is the transaction value of the goods, and that is the cost of the goods when you've exported them. So it's the price paid or payable at time of export, even if there is not a sale. Even if you're sending it down on consignment, it would still be the price paid or payable. Net cost can be used in place of transaction value, and net cost means the total cost minus sales promotion, marketing, after sales service costs, royalties, shipping, packing costs, non-allowable interest costs. Typically, only producers of the goods have sufficient knowledge to use net cost. And VNM is the value of non-originating materials that were used in the production of the good. So those are your foreign imports that have not come from Canada, USA, or Mexico. So on the right-hand side, this is what you would see. So rule number 1 that's shown is a tariff shift. If your goods do not meet that rule, then you would move to rule number 2, which is the ad valorem rule. You can use 60% where the transaction value method is used, or 50% where the net cost method is used. If the goods do not qualify under one rule, you just keep moving down until you hit a spot where your goods would qualify. If you get to the last of the rules, unfortunately, if you haven't qualified, you're non-compliant. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the example on the last page was a watch. So all materials that went into the production of the watch are of Canadian origin, except from the watch springs from Switzerland. The watch springs are valued at $5 and they're classified under HS 911490. The transaction value of a finished watch is $12 and the net cost is $10. Watch springs are also classified under the same heading, so they're not going to have a tariff shift. We've done the math on the left-hand side, and using the transaction method, the watch calculation is 58% regional value content. The transaction method rule states 60, so it does not qualify. Let's assume you're the producer and you can use the net cost, and it now will qualify because the net cost method is 50%. So you have a compliant watch that will result in a 0% duty going into the US. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the CUSMA rules of origin, this is where you will find the definitions, special consideration factors that impact origin, and the product-specific rules. Again, each product-specific rule will tell you the order. It may be a tariff shift, it may be an ad valorem rule, or it could be both. In order to use the rules of origin, you must know your HS classification of your goods and your valuation. The rules are not one size fits all, and they are product specific. We can go to the next slide. So here are some unique aspects of the rules of origin in CUSMA, and these are specific to CUSMA. Fungible goods are goods that are interchangeable. So let's say you have 1,000 screws, 600 are Canadian, 400 are German. They're identical, and in your assembly process, they're commingled. You can't tell one from the other. They're identical. This rule says that you can use the German goods as Canadian goods, but you have to follow a specific accounting record, and your inventory management must remain consistent throughout the year. Typically, it's first in, first out, or FIFO, if you're familiar with that term. Accumulation means that the process in one country can be counted in the processing of another country. So let's say that a company in Mexico imports some raw cotton from India and they spin it into cotton yarn. The tariff shift rule has not been met, and the goods are still considered to be Indian. If the cotton yarn is then sent to the US and spun and woven into a fabric, it also has not met the product-specific rule. But if the US company can count the processing in Mexico from raw cotton to fabric, the goods will now originate, as it does meet that specific rule. And that example I gave you, I could have said Canada in any part of that as well. So the next area is textiles. They have very specific rules, and in order to originate, most textiles and apparels must be produced. For apparel, that means cut and sewn in a CUSMA country from a yarn made in a CUSMA country. In recognition that our trading area does not produce a lot of textiles, CUSMA has a special clause called tariff preferential levels, or TPLs. And in essence, it allows a certain amount of non-originating product to be considered and recognized. It's kind of similar to the quota system. So it'll allow a little bit in either duty-free or at a greatly reduced duty rate. So in addition to reading Chapter 4 of the agreement for textiles, you also have to review Chapter 6. Automotive has a staging schedule, and for a vehicle, it requires the classification as either a passenger vehicle, a light, or a heavy truck. And typically, the vehicle requires 70 to 75% net cost to originate. Automotive parts are broken down into 3 different classifications. You have your core parts, which are stuff like engines and transmission, axle, suspension, advanced batteries. And then you have your principal parts, which are like tires, glass, pumps, air conditioning, bearing housing, brakes. And then you have your complementary parts. So those are dies and locks and catalytic converters, electric lighting, windshield wipers, defrosters. So parts require a labor cost calculation. And this was done to prevent unfair advantage to one country who may have a lower labor cost than another. Typically, you have to have 45% labor value. If you're an original equipment manufacturer, it's a requirement that you must do it through the labor cost. You cannot qualify any other way. And if you have parts that aren't listed in the agreement as being core, principal, or complementary, they're considered other parts. And in that case, you would use your regular tariff shift rules, your product specific rules found in Chapter 4. So that would be something like a mud flap or a cup holder or a seat cover that's not sewn or affixed to a seat. One of those special ones that you can buy. Another one, set of goods. Kits, each piece must originate and non-originating components cannot exceed 10%. A kit, that's something that you're grouping together. So the classic example is a pizza making kit, a camping bundle that might have a tent and a cooler and a sleeping bag. It's pretty straightforward. You just need to make sure that each piece will originate separately. And then de minimis. De minimis, generally it's 10% and exceptions exist. And Michelle already warned me that this would be a question for folks because de minimis typically means an allowance that the importer is allowed to claim. So we'll move to the next slide. In a rule of origin, it takes the literal meaning, of minimum importance. So this is allowed when you're doing a tariff shift rule. You cannot use it in a ad valorem or regional value content. It is only for the tariff shift. In most cases, 10% non-originating material that does not shift can be permitted. In textiles, it's a 10% by weight, not value, and there are exceptions, and they are listed in Chapter 4. You need to make sure your good is not an exception. So let's say you have a wooden desk, and the wood was cut in Canada, hewn in Canada, the varnish is Canadian, but you use German screws. As long as the screw value is less than 10% of the transaction value, the goods will originate. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. So the certification guidelines. There is no specific document or form to complete. Back when CUSMA was enacted, it was decided that having a certificate was a trade barrier to business, and it was just a further complication. And they've decided that a certification can be done. I think they actually confused folks when they did that. I think it was a little easier to use a form, but there's no specific document anymore. Your certification can be completed by the producer, the exporter, or the importer. You can do it in any of the 3 official languages. Be warned, if you use French or Spanish going into the US, they will ask for translation. You can also make your certification be for just that shipment or for a blanket certification for 1 year. We typically follow the calendar year, and you can do this electronically. Basically, you can use your invoice or you can use a separate piece of paper. The US Customs Border Patrol does have a template, and the link to this is on the CFIB site, and you can use that template if you find that easier. Basically, you have to meet the minimum data elements as outlined in the agreement. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So these are the minimum data elements, and as you're going through them, you'll likely notice that the first 5 are definitely going to be on your invoice anyways. Element 6, you likely have a description of the goods being sold, but you probably haven't put the HS number there. And perhaps you can modify your commercial invoice and you'll be able to put that in there without too much work. Number 7 is the origin criteria. This is basically a shorthand of which rule did you use to show that the good qualifies. We'll go over those shorthand acronyms on the next slide, so just bear with me. Element 8 is the time frame for the goods. Are you doing this for a full 12 months? Is it going to be for just this shipment? And element 9 is the signature and the attestation. The wording has to be identical and it must be signed and dated. This is one element. If it is missing, it will cause your certification to be null and void. We can go to the next slide. So this is the shorthand. Criterion 4A is what you would show on your invoice if your goods were wholly produced goods. 4B is for goods that have satisfied a tariff shift, a regional valuation, or both. 4C is when the goods are produced entirely in the territory of one or more of the CUSMA countries using only originating materials. So they're not wholly produced, but all of the inputs are from the trading block. Criterion 4D is rarely used. I've been doing this for 40 years and I've never seen it used. It's when you've inputted goods that do not have a tariff shift. When you have added value to them, you can still claim that they will qualify. So typically it would be something that's disassembled, that when assembled, it has the same HS subheader. But typically putting something together doesn't give you enough regional value content or transaction content. So it's rarely used. I'm not really positive why we still have it, to be honest. We can go to the next slide. Here is the statement of origin. Only officials who have the legal vested authority to sign on behalf of a company can make the attestation. And those who have sufficient knowledge of the origin of the goods may sign the certificate. So in essence, this has to be someone of sufficient authority within your company. Can they sign a check for your company? If they can't, they shouldn't be signing a statement of origin. It's your accountant, it's the owner, it's the manager. It is someone who has knowledge and you are responsible for the goods when you're signing that attestation. We can go to the next slide. Record keeping for Canada, it's not less than 6 years. For the US and Mexico, it's not less than 5 years. So what must be kept? I wish there was a checklist. It would make it so much easier for everyone, but the agreement states documents and the Customs Act states records, books, invoices, and documentation. They've kept it vague on purpose, and it's intentionally broad to capture a variety of forms. In a nutshell, you need to retain all documentation that supports your costing of the product, the origin, even emails from your suppliers where you've asked them, are these goods made in Tennessee? Yes, they are made in Tennessee. You're showing that you've done your due diligence. You should always have a certification if it is from someone in the CUSMA free trade area. But you're trying to prove that everything that you have used to calculate these goods or originating status must be retained. And there are different records for a producer versus an exporter. Producer, you have to show all of your costing because, of course, you can use the net cost method. We can go to the next slide. So compliance. Origin verification audits can be initiated by any of the 3 governments. But what will happen is that you will be visited by your home customs organization. So US CBP can ask Canada Customs, CBSA, to do an audit, and then CBSA will contact you as the exporter and the signer of the certificate. Typically, the audit is done by letter, but they can do a site visit. They can also ask for samples. Denial of the originating status will result in corrections. The payment of duty owed is within 90 days of the first year of corrections. Potentially 4 years can be audited. penalties can be levied, and in the case of fraud, criminal charges may result. Customs officials will review all of the documentation, the product literature, online platforms. It's certainly an onerous audit, and it is very thorough, and it is one that you do not want to take lightly. And again, if you were being audited, I would suggest that you would want to contact your Canadian customs broker for any assistance that they can provide. And I think that's the last slide. Oh, nope, sorry. What else to consider? So Chapter 98 or 99, these are special harmonized system chapters that can allow for duty-free access under certain conditions in manufacturing processes. Drawbacks. It is a means of retrieving money for goods that were imported, that were dutiable, that were used in the production of your goods. You can only file a drawback if the goods are exported. When you're filing a drawback to CUSMA, there is a calculation required called the lesser of two duties, and it's to make sure that there's no unfair advantage because of other various trade agreements that other nations may have. So if your Canadian duty was $10, your US duty was $6, you're allowed to claim back $6 Canadian. A word on that, you want to be careful if you're going to be doing returns, because a return can come back duty-free to you as Canadian goods being returned. But if you've claimed a drawback, then you're going to have to pay duty on it. And depending on the exchange rate, you could incur more payment than you need to. Next slide. Customs brokers, your best source of ensuring the goods are compliant to a trade agreement, your potential for drawback, and any of the latest changes that are in force. They are well informed and they know what is happening. I can't stress it enough to engage your Canadian customs broker. If you're looking for a customs broker, the CSCB has a searchable database for all member custom brokers. It's searchable by city and by province, and you should be aware that any customs broker in Canada can assist you, even if you're not located in the same city or town. CBSA also has a list of all licensed customs brokers, and I've put the link in there. And then education. My company, the CSCB, offers several courses. They're on general knowledge, HS, rules of origin. They're available to all members of the public. You can take a standalone course. There's no requirement to enroll in a full certification process. Next slide. And on to the questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Shelley. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Shelley. That was great. I know it's very complicated for those that are out there. As Shelley said, we'll try to answer some of your questions now. But if you don't have a customs broker and you want to go through this process, I think that one of the big messages is here. You may want to get a customs broker to help you with the CUSMA origin, rules of origin process, because it can be quite complex and they've probably seen it many times. So I'm wondering, so we can take the slide deck down for about 10-15 minutes while we do some questions with Shelley. I thought, Michelle, as I see you're here as well, that we might want to start with a couple questions around CARM. And Shelley, more than welcome. I'm sure you're very familiar with CARM as well. But that we might want to start with some of those, because I think that that would be helpful for folks. So Yi was asking, what if the duty in CARM is not correct, like charging much higher? In what way can they get it fixed? So
yeah, we are getting a couple of these sent in by other members as well, where maybe the wrong duty was applied, or wrong HS code had the inaccurate surtax of the new tariff. We've heard that there are some mistakes happening. Our team would be happy to review your CAD document to take a look whether or not your HS code should have had a tariff or not. It's been actually quite helpful for us to take a look at those codes and give that feedback straight to CBSA, because there has been quite a few mistakes happening. But there is a process if you think that your tariff was wrongfully applied. There is a process to get reimbursed for that, and we can certainly reach out and send some information via email on what that process looks like.
If I could add a point to that, programming is programming, right? They will make mistakes. But one of the things that I've been hearing from importers, there are two lists of goods that are attracting the surtax coming into Canada. So there's two different customs notices. Both are in effect. So make sure that you've looked at both customs notices. And then again, if your HS code is not on this list and it is attracting, it needs to be reported immediately.
Yeah. So yeah, and we have been hearing from members of mistakes on the wrong tariff being applied to the wrong HS code. So it's super helpful in our work if we can even get a copy of what happened in that circumstance.
And if anyone has paid, it will be refunded. You can file a refund. It's a clerical error.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask one more question on CARM, and then we should get to some CUSMA. I was going to take Robert's question, which is, I'm a very small importer, but of important items. What happens after May 20th if I do not put funds into CARM? Normally, I just pay with credit card as the invoices are posted. If I put my credit card number in the system under this new method, will they just charge the card as the invoices are posted?
So I think there's kind of two answers to this that come to mind first off. So first of all, in order to get your goods released through the border without having to be there in person to pay the duties and taxes, you need to be enrolled in what they call this RPP, release prior to payment program. It is done in two ways. You put a cash deposit or pay that on your credit card now, or you can get a bond, but you need to be enrolled in that unless you decide that you're going to go to the border to get those goods physically in person. The second part of this about the auto charge, Shelley, you might have more experience with this, and I would ask you to chime in, but I think you can put some pre-authorized auto charges if that's what you want as the invoices come in. There is a specific billing cycle, but your goods don't get released with the billing cycles. Your goods still need to be released under the RPP.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
was a good answer.
I'm not the customs
we might
broker,
come
but I
back to
know a lot.
CARM. Yeah, we might come back to CARM because I think there may be one other question further down, but I did want to spend some time on the CUSMA compliance. And I did want to start with Jacob's question, which is more about the tariffs overall, because he's been waiting for a while. But what are the tariffs basically the government of Canada borrowing money from Canadian businesses? I think is what his point is. Yeah.
Really, the tariff is to make the US goods more expensive. And the design, what we were told by the politicians, was that the money would be used to support Canadian businesses impacted by the tariffs. I'm not a huge fan of all of the reciprocal tariffs. There are some items, particularly food items, that I don't believe should have a reciprocal tariff because we have no alternative here to buy Canadian, right? Orange juice being the classic. I understand how Jacob can feel like they're borrowing it, but it's really to make the US goods more expensive, decrease sales, and send a message back.
Yeah. And in theory, the money is to be returned to industry in some form.
Correct.
So it's more like they're borrowing money from businesses to give back to businesses. It's just we're not sure in what form and to whom and how it's going to happen and when.
Right.
So those are some of the, All right. Let's take David's. This one should be fairly quickly. How is CUSMA compliance defined for maintenance services? They carry out repairs on U.S. origin equipment using U.S. origin parts, where a substantial portion of the charge to the customers is labor and other services.
You're not actually going to incur any tariffs at all. So you're in a great business model, and more power to you. The labor service part is part of your contract. It's not a tangible good. You're within the trade agreement. You're within the free trade zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're in a very good business right now.
Yvette has a question around, we're a small manufacturing company. I'm the office manager and responsible for shipping. I do not have signing authority on our bank account. Neither does our operations manager. Do we have sufficient authority to sign the attestation, or is the owner the only person who can sign?
If you have knowledge of these goods, if you know what has gone into them, if you can do the calculation, if it's an RVC, or you know where you've sourced these, yes, you can sign. I use the example of signing authority because that usually precludes clerical folks. But you want to make sure that you know this widget came from China. I put it into this, the value meets, and I've met the rule. That's the knowledge level you need.
Okay. Michelle, did you want to ask one, or do you want me to continue?
We can do, I really like this one from Analia. She talks about, so we export art antiques that we import from France. Carriers are asking that all of these products need to have trademark. We explain that most of the time artists do not write or mark their COO in their productions. How can we prove to the US that these products are coming from France? So maybe not totally CUSMA compliant, but proving where the product originated from.
Your bill of lading would help. You could also put on your invoice product of France because it would not have attained any value or any content in Canada that would qualify, especially antique. But there is an HS code for antiques, and it will be duty free in Chapter 98 going into the US. So as long as it meets the criteria of being an antique, and usually that's over 100 years old. Art in some cases can be 50 years. It depends on the medium. So you'd have to do a little bit of research, but I would show the bill of lading coming from France to prove the provenance.
Okay. I am going to jump over to John, who put something on the chat.
Yeah, I like that
it's
one.
similar to the question that was asked in advance around he says he shipped 50 small packages per day to the USA, should be USMCA compliant. All items are identical. Can they go through a shipper like Stallion, or do they need to go through a broker for each and every package? And can they use a certificate method so that each package does not need its own clearance?
Okay. Try to unbundle this a little bit. Should be CUSMA compliant. You need to make sure they are CUSMA compliant. Origin does not change by shipper. All modes of transportation, if your goods are CUSMA compliant or USMCA compliant, that does not change by any mode of transportation. So Stallion, as I understand it, is like an e-commerce platform. And they do shipping like a courier would. So absolutely, that's fine. If they are doing the clearances, they have to be a US licensed customs broker. Just like if you're coming into Canada, you either have to do self-clearance or use a Canadian customs broker. You can use the certificate method to prove that the goods are CUSMA compliant. That's fine, but it still has to clear customs. Even though there's no duty payable, you still have to file an entry.
Okay. I did want to ask you something Elisa had here. She says their customs broker is now charging a compliance fee for tariff inquiries due to volume. And she's asking, is anyone else is doing the same, or has that become more of a norm in the industry, I guess, is what I will interpret.
I mean, customs brokers aren't going to work for free. That is a process that you have to go through. The more complex the goods, obviously, the more work is involved. As you've seen, there's a lot of complexities in figuring out the origin process. There is tariff finders that you can use online, and I'm going to caution everyone because those, while a good tool, are not the be all to end all because they're based on what you've input. And that includes the tariff lookup that is available in CARM.
Right.
And it is not guaranteed just because you've used the CARM tariff finder that the goods are correctly classified. And CBSA takes no liability for it. It is based off of how you describe the goods. One of the classic examples when tariff finders first came out is a gentleman had typed in Coke and he was sending a shipment of like Coca-Cola. And what came up was the mineral. Not the same thing, right? You have to use the language of the tariff. And if you're not familiar, if you've never read the tariff, it is written in British English. So, it's referred to as trams and trolleys, lifts instead of elevators, chemise, camisoles. Like it's not common English words. And it was written quite a long time ago. So you have to keep that in mind. To me, having an opinion on your tariff classification is a good, solid investment.
Right. Michelle, we're down to the last few minutes. Do you have any other last questions?
One that comes up a lot that I was hoping you could answer on this one is, so tariffs going to apply to a product manufactured in the USA, shipped from Canada? So i.e. returning goods to the USA.
Yeah. When goods are duty paid and then returned, as long as you've not filed a drawback or a refund request from CBSA, they are duty free. And that's the beauty of 9801. So that chapter is very, very important. So there's no duty. The key to that, you cannot have enhanced or added value to the product. It's in the same condition when it left to when it's coming back. You're good.
One more question I'm hoping to get in before the end of this session. And maybe you can just give us a sense of what you're hearing on the grounds from customs broker, but it's something we've been hearing from business owners a little bit, is whether or not there's been an increase in pricing with custom brokers. One member here has a question about, are brokers now charging for compliance fee for tariff inquiries due to the number of volumes they're getting? Is anyone else doing the same? So is that kind of what's happening right now on the ground with custom brokers?
I would suggest that if you call a customs broker and don't have a relationship with them and ask them to certify a tariff number for you, or I shouldn't say certify, to quantify a tariff number for you, they're going to charge you for that. You're accessing their knowledge. You're not really paying them for the 2 seconds it might take if it's an easy one, or the hour. You're really paying them for all the years of experience that lead into this. If you have a relationship with a customs broker, they're probably not going to charge you because you've already have a book of business with them. But a random call off the street, I would think you're going to get charged.
Okay. I am conscious of time. It is a couple minutes left, but I also want to get one more question in before I wrap up. It's actually one of the last ones that came in from Amanda. We ship components to the US to be processed and returned to Canada. Do we get tariffed twice?
Can you read that again? I'm sorry.
So they ship components to the US that then get processed and then they're returned back to Canada. So do they get tariffed times two? Yes, it depends on the product, right?
It depends on the product. It really
could
does.
be if it's not compliant going in and on the list coming back. They could potentially get tariffed twice. Okay.
And if the value that the US is adding, if they're using non-originating components, then it it could also attract duty. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a very complex
Yeah,
question.
it depends on what the products are.
It does. It really does.
Okay, we're gonna have to hold it there. I'm gonna ask one more clarification from both of you around CARM. I think there's still some thought that the customs broker can hold the bond. And I think you need to clarify that after May 20th, the customs broker can no longer hold the bond, correct? It has
Right.
to.
So that's the biggest change with CARM, is that it now, the liability is now put on the business owner. And so that bond that the custom broker always, that they used to have, it's actually in the legislation that it should have always been the business owner. They're just with CARM implementing this, but the RPP is causing quite a bit of headache for a lot of folks. So we are trying to get a bit of a extension on that one.
Okay. All right. Well, can we bring the deck back up? Thank you for all of those answers. We know we had a lot more questions that we didn't get to. We will continue to provide as much feedback as we can on our website and what's happening there. So please continue to check out our tariff webpage for that information. There may be some others. If you didn't get your questions answered, please, you can give us a call. We can certainly try and answer them. So don't forget that we're here for you. In the meantime, we wanted to make sure you're still aware of some of the posters we have available supporting local businesses. Of course, if you need to trade in the United States, you got to do what you got to do for your business, but you may also want to consider building some of your Canadian clientele. And we've created some paraphernalia that you can use to sort of promote that your business is Canadian owned. If you go to the next slide, and that's up on our website right now. We do have a webinar coming up. We've just had to change the date, so that's why it's not specific here, but I think the new dates are around early June. We're going to have an economic outlook with our chief economist, Simon Gaudreau. So it gives you a better sense of what's coming at you in the next little while. So if you want to kind of see where the economy is going from our perspective and what we're hearing from other members like you may want to check that one out. You should be hearing about it in the next week or so. And then on the last slide, just I think, yes, just to remind you about our member portal. This is where you can get even more detailed information specifically for members. If you haven't checked it out, I encourage you to do so. It is a portal specifically for members, filled with all kinds of really good information. For example, the webinars, but also some of the key links that you may need to have to get the resources for your business. And finally, I think it's the last one coming up next. As we like to say on many of these webinars, if you know of somebody who may benefit from some of the work that we're doing and some of the information that we're sharing, please feel free to refer them to us, and we would love to grow the membership and continue to have a bigger voice for small businesses right across Canada. So with that, I want to thank both Shelley and Michelle for taking the time. Yes, here's the number if you need to call us. Happy to sort of take your calls and try to answer more of your questions if we didn't get to them today. Any final thoughts from you, Shelley, as we close out? Thank you again for your time today, but if you want to give you 2 seconds for anything you like to say.
I would strongly recommend the use of a customs broker to help you. It's a one-time cost that can keep you compliant on your exports. And I wish you all the success in your exporting business. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Shelley. Michelle, any final thoughts?
Thanks everyone for being with us today. If you have any thoughts or questions or concerns or anything you want to share about the next few webinars that we'll be prepping, we're happy to listen to those too as you sign off and do your next survey here with us. Thank you.
Thanks to both Shelley and Michelle, and thank you for joining us. We hope this was helpful. And as Michelle said, please feel free to share any other thoughts or ideas you might have for future webinars. I apologize for going slightly over. I also will do a shout out if you want to sign a petition that we shared earlier. I think that we gave you a link to that, and I always encourage you to fill out our survey so that we can continue to represent you well with governments across the board. Thank you again for joining us. With that, we will close the webinar.